Listen carefully because retirement does not automatically give you the life you spent 40 years imagining. Sometimes it just gives you the time to finally notice what was actually missing the whole way through. I am 84 years old, and I retired at 61, sooner than planned, and far less gracefully than I had imagined for 20 years. I made several mistakes in those first few years that nobody warned me about. Mistakes that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with how I tried to build a life inside all that sudden, unfamiliar quiet. My name is Harold. I am 84 years old. My heart is running at 38%. And today I want to share 5 things I learned, mostly the hard way, that you should never do after you retire if you want those years to actually feel like a beginning rather than a slow disappearing. This is not financial advice. This is about what happens to a man once the structure that organized his entire identity for 40 years is suddenly gone. Before we continue, if you are retired or getting close to it, please like this video, because almost nobody prepares you emotionally for what those first quiet mornings actually feel like. Let's begin with the first thing. Never let your identity disappear along with your job title. For 39 years I was an engineer. It was the answer I gave at parties, at family gatherings, in the brief conversations strangers have while waiting for coffee. The week after I retired, someone asked me what I did, and I genuinely did not know how to answer. I said, I used to be an engineer, and the past tense felt like a small, specific kind of grief. I spent the first year reaching for that old identity in conversations, even though it no longer fit, because I had not yet built anything to replace it. If you are approaching retirement, start asking yourself now who you are underneath the job title, because that question becomes urgent the moment the title disappears. Here is the second thing. Never replace 40 years of structure with no structure at all. I genuinely believed, for the first few months, that freedom meant having no schedule whatsoever. Sleep until I woke naturally, eat whenever, no alarm, no calendar, no obligations. Within 3 months, days had started blurring together in a way that frightened me. I would lose track of what day of the week it was. An entire week would pass and I could not clearly remember what had filled it. Structure was not the prison I thought it was for 39 years. It was actually scaffolding, and removing it all at once left me without anything holding the days into a shape I could recognize. If you are still here, please subscribe, because the next few things may matter even more than these first 2. Here is the third thing. Never assume your spouse wants you home as much as you want to be home. This one genuinely surprised me, and I think it surprises most men. For decades, Margaret had built a rhythm to her days that did not include me being present from morning until evening. When I retired, I assumed she would simply welcome that change completely. About 2 months in, she told me, gently but honestly, that having me home constantly was its own adjustment for her too. Not because she did not want me there, because her own structure, her own friendships, her own quiet morning routines had been built around hours when I was usually elsewhere. We had to renegotiate something neither of us expected to need renegotiating, simply how to share a house all day, every day, after decades of not doing that. I want to go back to this one for a moment because it deserves more honesty than I initially gave it. A few weeks into retirement, I noticed Margaret had started taking slightly longer at the grocery store than she used to. I did not think much of it at first. Then one afternoon she came home and mentioned, almost in passing, that she had run into her friend Carol there, and they had talked for nearly 40 minutes by the cereal aisle. I asked her, half joking, if the grocery store had become a social club. She laughed, but there was something underneath the laugh. She said that for years the grocery store on Tuesday mornings had been one of the few places she got to simply exist as herself, not as my wife, not as anyone's mother, just Margaret, talking to whoever she happened to run into. She told me she had started timing her errands differently since I retired, partly out of habit, but partly, she admitted, because she still wanted some hours that were entirely her own. It had nothing to do with not loving the time we spent together. It had everything to do with the fact that she had built an entire interior life across 4 decades that did not actually require my presence, and that life still mattered to her. I had never once considered that my retirement might require her to defend something of her own. Here is the fourth thing. Never stop making plans that are weeks or months away. In my working years, my calendar was always full of things scheduled ahead, projects, meetings, deadlines. After retiring, I noticed my calendar had gone almost completely empty, and without realizing it, I had also stopped looking forward to anything specific. A friend of mine named Eugene told me something that stuck with me. He said the people he had watched age the fastest after retirement were the ones who stopped having anything on the calendar to look forward to, even something small. I started deliberately scheduling things again. Visits with grandchildren planned weeks out, a small trip every few months, something, anything, sitting on the calendar ahead of me, because I learned that anticipation itself seemed to matter almost as much as whatever the actual plan turned out to be. If you have made it this far, please subscribe and turn on notifications, because the fifth thing is the one I regret the most of all five. Here is the fifth and final thing. Never wait for retirement to finally become the person you kept saying you would become once you had time. I had told myself for decades that once I retired, I would finally read more, finally call old friends more often, finally slow down and actually be present in ordinary moments instead of always managing the next thing. The honest truth is that having the time did not automatically produce the person I had been promising myself I would become. The habits of urgency and distraction that I had practiced for 40 years did not disappear simply because my calendar had emptied out. It took real, deliberate effort in my 70s to actually become the version of myself I had been quietly promising for decades. Time alone was never going to do that work for me. I had to. So here is what I actually believe, after 84 years of mostly learning this far too late. Retirement does not automatically deliver the life you imagined while you were too busy to live it. It simply removes the excuse of being too busy. What you build inside that newly open space is still entirely up to you, just as it always was. One more thing before I let you go. I think the hardest truth in all five of these is that retirement does not change who you fundamentally are. It just removes the structure that had been quietly organizing who you already were. If you spent 40 years avoiding stillness through constant work, stillness will still feel uncomfortable on the other side of retirement, exactly the way it always did. The job was never actually the thing keeping that discomfort away. It was just the thing that had been distracting you from noticing it was there. Now tell me in the comments, if you are retired, which of these five surprised you the most? And if you are not retired yet, which one are you most worried about? I read every single comment, and I would really like to know. I am Harold, and there is more to say. I will say it.